There's a man who has appeared in hundreds of farming videos watched by millions of people, and almost nobody knows a single thing about him. He rarely speaks, he avoids the camera, he disappears mid-shot, and yet fans of this farm wife have been asking about him since the very beginning. His name is Lawrence Bernard, the quiet force behind one of YouTube's most beloved farming channels. And for years, he was little more than a shadow in the background of his wife's videos. No interviews, no social media, no explanations, just a farmer doing his job, completely unbothered by the audience growing around him. But that silence told its own story, one about a man with strong convictions, deep roots, and zero interest in being watched. What changed him, why he finally opened up, and what he's actually said, that's exactly what we're getting into today. To understand Lawrence Bernard, you first have to understand the woman who pointed a camera at him. Meredith didn't stumble into farming by accident. She practically had agriculture in her DNA. Both of her parents worked at North Carolina State University, and that world of livestock, land, and rural life surrounded her from childhood. She went on to earn a bachelor's degree in animal science and a master's in agricultural education from NC State with a plan to become a teacher. That plan lasted exactly as long as her student teaching placement. One semester in a classroom was enough to tell her that wasn't her path. Instead, she found her way into corporate feed sales, traveling across North Carolina, working with farmers and livestock producers, and building a career that genuinely suited her. For 12 years, she was the breadwinner. She had the company truck, the gas card, the benefits, and a salary most people would think twice before walking away from. But as her family grew, so did the weight of leaving every morning. She described crying on the drive away from the sitter's house, watching her kids' faces pressed against the glass as she pulled out of the driveway. Something had to give. In 2013, with Lawrence's full support behind her, she made the call. She handed back the keys, walked away from 12 years of steady income, and came home to the farm. She had no blueprint, no guarantee, and no farming experience to speak of. Lawrence had been running the operation entirely on his own, and now she was stepping into his world. He didn't hesitate, and that, right there, tells you more about Lawrence Bernard than any camera ever has. Most love stories start with a dinner, a party, or a chance encounter. Lawrence and Meredith started with a problem horse and a woman too stubborn to quit riding. During her years in feed sales, Meredith was an avid rider. Horses were a passion she'd carried since high school. But after a bad fall, something shifted. The confidence was gone, and every time she climbed back into the saddle, the fear came with her. Word got around that there was a farmer in Caswell County who had a reputation for working miracles with difficult horses. His name was Lawrence Bernard. What Lawrence recognized almost immediately was that the horse wasn't the problem. Meredith was. Not in a harsh way, but in the way that only someone with a deep understanding of animals could see. The fear she was carrying was telegraphing straight through to the horse, and the horse was simply responding to it. He helped her work through it, and in doing so, he handed her a lesson she said has played out through every challenge she's faced since, that the obstacle is rarely what it appears to be on the surface. By the time they worked cattle together for the first time, Lawrence had apparently made up his mind. He told her he just had to marry her. So that's exactly what he did. Over a decade of marriage, 2 kids, son Wesley and daughter Austin, and a working beef cattle farm in Milton, North Carolina later, the Bernards are still at it every single day. It's a foundation built on something most people spend a lifetime looking for. Someone who sees exactly what you're capable of before you do. But living that kind of life doesn't come without its costs. And Lawrence was about to find out exactly what Meredith had in mind for him next. When Meredith first picked up a camera and started documenting life on the farm, Lawrence made his position crystal clear. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with it. This was his workplace, a place where serious work got done, equipment broke down at the worst possible moments, and there was always something demanding his full attention. The last thing he needed was his wife showing up mid-repair with a phone in his face asking how things were going. His response to that particular scenario was, according to Meredith, a string of words she had to bleep out entirely. For a long time, Lawrence was more of a rumor than a presence on the channel. Viewers knew he existed. They heard Meredith talk about him constantly. The farmer fixed this. The farmer said that. But actually seeing him on camera was another matter. When he did appear, it was usually brief, often accidental, and frequently accompanied by the kind of expression that made it obvious he was tolerating the situation rather than enjoying it. One outside observer who visited the farm described him perfectly. He had a habit of rolling his eyes at the camera in a way that felt completely relatable to anyone who had ever been filmed against their will. And yet, that reluctance made him one of the most talked about figures in the entire farming YouTube space. Fans became almost obsessed with catching a glimpse of him. Comments piled up begging Meredith to get him on camera more. The channel leaned into the joke. One episode was literally titled, "The Farmer Speaks," as though Lawrence saying more than a sentence was a newsworthy event. The irony was hard to miss. The man who wanted nothing to do with YouTube had accidentally become one of its most beloved mysteries, but something was quietly shifting behind the scenes. Nobody changes overnight, and Lawrence Bernard certainly didn't. But somewhere between the eye rolls and the bleeping out of his reactions, something started to shift. The first thing that moved the needle was the one language every farmer understands fluently: money. What had started as Meredith pointing an iPhone at cows and cooking steaks in a cast-iron skillet was now genuinely contributing to the family's income. For a man who had spent his entire life measuring success in harvests and cattle weights, that was an argument he couldn't dismiss. He'd called it a blind hole. The numbers were proving otherwise, but if the money cracked the door open, it was the people who pushed it all the way through. As the channel grew, the Bernards started encountering their viewers in real life, and those conversations clearly hit differently than any comment section ever could. Meredith has talked about how much it meant to Lawrence to hear directly from people about what the channel had given them. Farmers who felt less alone in their struggles. City dwellers who'd never set foot on a working farm suddenly understanding where their food came from. People writing in to say the Bernards had inspired them to make their own leap of faith. That kind of impact is hard to shrug off, even for the most camera-averse man in North Carolina. Gradually, Lawrence started showing up more, then talking more, then answering questions on camera. Hay baling, equipment repairs, farm philosophy. Meredith joked in one episode description that he was smiling on the inside while doing it, which was probably accurate. The channel even celebrated a Q&A episode where Lawrence answered fan questions as though it were a historic occasion. For his audience, it genuinely was, and what he said when he finally opened up revealed exactly the kind of man they had suspected all along. Once Lawrence started talking, what came through wasn't a polished YouTube personality. It was something far more valuable, a man completely at peace with a life most people would find brutally hard. The Bernard farm is not a highlight reel operation. There are no hired hands, no backup crew, no cavalry arriving when things fall apart. It is Lawrence, Meredith, and whatever piece of equipment decided to stop working that particular morning. Flooding has hit the farm in multiple seasons. Machinery breaks down mid-harvest at the exact moment it can least afford to. Old equipment fails in creative and expensive ways with reliable frequency. And Lawrence's response to all of it has been the same quiet stubbornness that defines everything he does. He once spent several days nursing a grinder back to life, only for it to die completely the following week. His philosophy on running older equipment is telling. While most farmers dream of newer machinery, Lawrence has maintained that older equipment has one significant advantage: he can actually fix it himself. That self-reliance isn't a quirk, it's a worldview. It showed up most clearly in something he said to Meredith early on, that she has repeated publicly more than once. "Farming is tough," he told her, "but you are never going to make a living out here. You are going to make a life. The more you put into it, the better that life gets." That single sentence captures Lawrence Bernard better than any camera ever could. Even the family's decision to invest in a newer combine was driven partly by concern for his health. The old machine was putting too much dust into his lungs with every harvest. A man who resisted being known had quietly revealed everything about who he was. Something interesting happens when a private person slowly lets the world in. The world tends to appreciate it more than if they'd been performing all along. Lawrence Bernard never tried to be likable on camera. He never learned the language of YouTube, never worked on his delivery, never gave the audience what they expected. And somehow that made viewers trust him completely. Every moment they got from him felt earned rather than manufactured, which in a space crowded with carefully constructed personalities is genuinely rare. The dynamic between Lawrence and Meredith became one of the quiet charms of the channel. She is the storyteller, warm, open, and completely comfortable, sharing every high and low with hundreds of thousands of strangers. He is the counterweight, still showing up with that unmistakable energy that inspired Meredith to name one of her episodes the Put the Phone Down channel. A joke that landed because everyone watching knew exactly which person in the marriage had that energy. And yet he keeps showing up. That matters more than it might seem. Because the version of Lawrence Bernard that audiences eventually got wasn't a breakthrough moment or a sudden personality transplant. It was a slow accumulation of real moments. A dry comment here, a farming answer there, a rare laugh caught on camera that felt like finding something unexpected. Viewers around the world, from Australia to New Zealand to Canada, have written in saying they feel like they know this man. Farmers who share his philosophy, city people who admire his conviction, couples who see something familiar in the way he and Meredith operate together. A man who wanted nothing to do with being watched became someone millions of people quietly root for. And that kind of connection doesn't come from trying. It only ever comes from being real.